Thank you, Mr. President. It is an honor for me to take part in this debate today. Good morning, esteemed colleagues and respected guests, and thank you for joining us today on this debate. I'll start by welcoming our distinguished colleagues who will be speaking on the opposition of this motion. Mrs. Ribello as a first speaker and Mr. Valle as a second speaker, as well as Mrs. Esma, who will be joining me on the proposition of this motion. All of that being said, let us begin by considering the environment that we strive to cultivate in academia. Universities and academic institutions are not merely centers of knowledge, they are spaces where ideas flourish and where people from diverse backgrounds collaborate and innovation thrives. However, when certain groups feel excluded, marginalized, or invisible because of the language we use, it creates barriers to participation and undermines the very principles of equity and inclusion that academia stands for. Inclusive language is not about imposing restrictions to free speech. It is about fostering respect and recognizing the dignity of every individual. When we adopt inclusive language, we make a conscious effort to avoid expression that perpetuate stereotypes or reinforce systemic biases. For example, using gender-neutral terms such as hair person or instead of chairman, or addressing a group as everyone instead of ladies and gentlemen may seem like small changes, but they send a powerful message that would be that everyone belongs here. The impact of inclusive language extends far beyond semantics. Research shows that inclusive language helps reduce implicit biases and fosters a greater sense of belonging among underrepresented groups. When students and scholars see their identities acknowledged and respected, they are more likely to engage, participate, and therefore excel. This is particularly important for individuals from marginalized communities, including women, LGBTQ+ individuals, people of color, and those with disabilities. By making academia more inclusive, we unlock the full potential of our intellectual community. Opponents may argue that inclusive language is an unnecessary burden or an overreach to political correctness. To them, I say that inclusivity is not about policing words, but about creating a culture where everyone feels valued. It is a proactive step towards dismantling the structural inequities that have persisted for far too long. And academic excellence cannot thrive in a vacuum of exclusion. It thrives when diverse voices contribute to the discourse, and that diversity begins with ensuring our language reflects our commitment to inclusion. We must also recognize that language evolves. Terms and expressions that were once considered acceptable may now be outdated or even harmful. And staying attuned to this evolution is not a sign of weakness or excessive caution. It is a sign of our commitment to growth and our willingness to learn, which is the entire point of academia. By adopting inclusive language, we also demonstrate that academia is not static, but it is dynamic, and it is also responsive to the needs of its members. Additionally, the benefits of inclusive language are not limited to those who belong to marginalized groups. A culture of inclusivity enhances the experience of everyone within the academic community. When we create environments that prioritize respect and understanding, we foster collaboration, innovation, and mutual support. And these are the foundation of academic excellence at the end of the day. And these are the pillars of a thriving intellectual community as well. In conclusion, inclusive language is not a trivial matter. It is a powerful instrument of change and a step towards reducing discrimination, as well as fostering a more equitable academic environment. It signals our commitment to the values of respect, dignity, and inclusion. So, therefore, let us choose words that build bridges rather than walls, and words that inspire instead of excluding, as well as words that reflect the inclusive future that we aspire to create. Now I'll give word to Mrs. Ribello on the opposition. This has been everything in my hand, so proud to propose. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. President, and all the members of the House for allowing me to take part in this debate, as it is a privilege for me to be here today. So it falls upon me to introduce the members of the proposition, who are Ms. Badiola and Ms. Esma. And I've got to say that I want to listen, I want to hear more about them, but I should start with my views. So the real dilemma today is whether or not inclusive language helps to reduce discrimination in academia or not. Let me tell you, it doesn't. To begin with, discrimination is systemic and not just about words. By this I mean discrimination is rooted in deeper societal and institutional structures rather than just on how people speak. For example, in education, problems like unequal funding, lack of access to good resources, and unfair admission or hiring practices are the real causes of inequality, therefore discrimination. So changing the way we talk, in this case using more inclusive words, is helpful for raising awareness but wouldn't solve this issue. So imagine a poorly funded school. If we only focus on how people speak, so how teachers and students speak, the problem would still remain and it wouldn't be solved. Apart from that, there will be the risk of tokenism. For those who aren't aware with this term, tokenisms are symbolic gestures that don't have a real impact. So if institutions only emphasized in changing language, the problem will still remain and it will be a false sense of progress. So in short, language matters, but it's not enough on its own to tackle this issue. So if we want to do so, we should focus more in actions and not words. Apart from that, I would like to talk about the resistance there would be to inclusive language. So some people feel that being told to use specific inclusive words is an act of control. So instead of fostering a supportive environment, this could lead to division. When inclusive feels forced, it risks causing backlash, undermining the real intended goal of creating harmony. Apart from that, we know that language norms differ across cultures, and what is considered inclusive in one might not resonate or could even offend in the other culture. So in some cultures, gender-neutral terms are common, while in others they may clash with their traditions, leaving some groups unheard and excluded. Apart from this, the data on effectiveness this has is unclear. While inclusive language reflects society's growing awareness of equality issues, there is limited hard evidence that this has a real impact, solely changing language reduces actual discriminatory behavior. Although it is true that some research have shown that workshops have a more direct impact on changing an inclusive environment, while solely focusing on language. But this does not occur in academia or other environments. To finish off, I would like to address the challenges in defining and applying this inclusive language. So there isn't a clear universal agreement on what inclusive is, so people interpret it in different ways. As an example, one might think that using gender-neutral terms such as they for everyone is inclusive, while others might feel as if their identity is erased. What's more, when trying to be inclusive, sometimes language can have the opposite effect. For example, there's this debate about person-first language and identity-first language. So person-first language would be, for example, a disabled person. And identity-first language would be, I got confused. Would be person with a disability, and identity-first would be a disabled person. Some people with disabilities prefer a person-first language as it emphasizes the individual before the disability. However, others identify with being disabled, so they want to have that as an integral part of their identity. So attempting to standardize one might inadvertently exclude the people who identify with the other. So we can say that inclusive language is not a one-size-fits-all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me to take part on this debate. I am pleased to be here today, and now I should focus on my arguments. To start with, I believe inclusive language creates a favorable environment for historically oppressed populations, such as women, LGBTQ plus individuals, racial and ethnic minorities, those who have disabilities and so on, as mentioned before. When academic institutions use language that acknowledges these groups' experiences, it can promote a more supportive environment, which mainly leads to a reduction of structural inequalities and bias. For instance, terms like chairman or policeman insinuate that only men can dedicate themselves to those roles, strengthening gender inequality. Moreover, it is essential to point out that the psychological impact of exclusion is well established. When individuals feel that their identities are overlooked or dismissed by the language used in academies, they tend to get severe anxiety due to issues like isolation and so on. And in extreme circumstances, it also leads to depression. In particular, gender language or misgendering individuals can harm the mental health of either transgender or non-binary people. For that reason, it is crucial to seek a more comprehensive atmosphere and also to support and sympathize with those who may not feel welcome. Last but not least, as society moves forward and becomes more aware of gender, race, and other identities, academies must adapt and make use of a language that reflects those changes. Therefore, implementing an inclusive speech demonstrates that educational institutions are committed to equality and also respect for diversity, avoiding awkward situations and extremely uncomfortable situations too. This representation is not just about being recognized, but also about making sure that you all have a chance to take part in either academic discussions and activities. When students see themselves represented in the language used in teaching, it makes them feel more confident and motivated to get involved in the academic process. And they also feel more secure with themselves. So, to sum up, I believe inclusive language promotes a friendlier and more peaceful environment, also respectful, and it is for these reasons that I urge you to vote in favor of the proposition. Now I give the word to Mr. Valle, who is the last member of the opposition. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you, Mr. President, for letting me take part in the debate. I'm going to be in the opposition team back-to-back with Junie Gibello, and I will be in opposition to Mrs. Paula Badiola and Mrs. Leire Sesma. This time, I only needed two strong arguments to demonstrate that not only the usage of inclusive language doesn't help in the discrimination in academia, but does the complete opposite. It helps with the discrimination against minorities. My first argument is that inclusive language is not grammatically correct, and therefore we mustn't use it in academia. As I think, inclusive language is overall something that should really be respected, as each individual's identity should and must be respected, without taking into account their identity, sexuality, race, and among others. But its usage in academia is something completely different. We must bear in mind and take into account that in academical situations we must focus on educating in an appropriate way the next generations. By this means, I really don't mean that inclusive language is not correct, but we should focus on educating the next generations in an appropriate way. And grammatically speaking, as I said before, the inclusive language is something that is not correct nor recognized, at least in Spain, by the Real Academia de la Lengua. Therefore, in academia, it shouldn't be acknowledged. Then I would be focusing at bullying, which is the strongest argument in the opposition team. So to start off, I would like to ask a rhetorical question, which is that what do bullies really focus on, which is minorities. Yeah, it's minorities, and as rough as it sounds, sadly bullying will never stop. Doesn't matter if you are tall, doesn't matter if you are gay, doesn't matter if you are short, you will always be picked on. Also doesn't matter if you are 14, 13 or 19, if you are in school or if you are in college, there will also be dirtbags who are going to be messing with you. Also, how many times have we heard about the terrible consequences of bullying? It doesn't matter on the TV, on the radio, and even ourselves in person, and we haven't done anything about it, leading to the terrible consequences of it. By this means, I really think that this is unacceptable, but for the moment, we mustn't include the inclusive language in academia, because it would do the complete opposite thing. As in politics, we sometimes have to choose the least the least unfavorable option, just to prevent ourselves to being prejudiced. Once our society advanced as much as we need to stop and prevent bullying, then we will be able to include these things that help the marginalized groups. Now, to end it all, I would like to sum up all the arguments that we have mentioned against the opposition team, which is the resistance to inclusive language mentioned by June, the data of effectiveness, that the data of effectiveness is unclear, and that there would be a lot of challenges in applying the inclusive language. Apart from the ones that I just mentioned in the latest minutes, which is that the inclusive language is not grammatically correct, and therefore we mustn't nor use it nor acknowledge it in the academic situations. And the last one, and the most important one, is bullying. So having said that, I really encourage you guys to vote for the opposition team. Thank you.